Welcome to the Comic Sauce Podcast, where we talk comics and comics culture. I am Henry Liu, and today I am joined by Christian Diadamo. Christian, how's it going?
Hey, hey, goes well.
Excellent. I am also joined by Porfirio Rangel. Porfirio, how goes?
I'm all good. How's it going, Henry?
Going well, going very well. Today is August 21st, 2024. And the year 2024 marks the 10-year anniversary of Captain America, the Winter Soldier. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And I guess we can start with the spoiler alert. This is a 10-year-old film, but I would hate to spoil this movie for anyone because it's so awesome. And let's give the spoiler alert. So now I'm going to kick it over to Christian, who's going to moderate the conversation. Christian?
All right. Thank you, Henry. Captain America the Winter Soldier, released April 4th, 2014, 10 years ago, and it is regarded still as one of the most beloved MCU movies. It really kicked off, I think, this hot streak that Marvel had that went pretty much all the way up to Endgame or Far From Home, where each movie was this massive blockbuster banger. Everyone had to go see what was next in the MCU. Each movie was big. And I think a rising tide lifts all ships, even movies that people may not have been as into or may not have done because it was part of the Marvel machine because it had that MCU name. People had to go see they were just big hits. And I think this movie in particular really had to do a lot with it. Because it's so widely beloved and it's just so damn cool. So, I think before we get into the movie, let's talk about Captain America himself. Captain America is one of the oldest comic book characters, going back to the 40s. A very iconic first cover with him punching Hitler. And so, let me start by asking you guys, who is Cap? What does he mean to you? Is he one of your favorite superheroes? Then you guys wanna kick this off.
I can kick it off because I do love Captain America. He is one of my favorite superheroes. And that's a good question. Why? Why is Captain America so beloved? So you mentioned how he's a really old character. He's a golden age superhero. And, um, the coolness factor on Cap has kind of gone up and down through the decades. He's definitely been looked upon as being kind of an uncool character at times. He's like the ultimate Boy Scout, goody two shoes, kind of thing. I think he's really cool because he's such a good person. Yeah, he's really the moral compass of the Marvel universe. And the fact that he is the ultimate Boy Scout, I think that's pretty cool. He's a nice person, he's a good person. He's always looking to do the right thing. And yeah, the the Marvel Studios films that feature Captain America really highlight that. And I think it's really cool that the comics and the films really show that Captain America's superpower isn't so much the super soldier serum, his ability to fight, his super strength, that sort of thing, but rather the goodness within him. The fact that he is a good person and the fact that he had the superpower even before he took the super soldier serum, right? He was a good person when he was a little skinny guy, and he stayed a good person. So that's his superpower. And a big appeal of Cap to me is that he is relatable. He doesn't have like cosmic powers. He can't fly. Um, everything is everything he does to an extent anyone can do, particularly like what I mentioned, him being a good person. Anyone can be a good person. Anyone can stand up for what they believe in. Anyone can try as hard as we see Captain America try, you know, get beat down, but stand up and say, I can do this all day, right? We all can do that. So relatability is a big part of his appeal. And yeah, like it's kind of cliche, but sometimes you just can't help but root for the good guy. And like, this is a good guy. He's the best of us. Captain America is the best of us. And yeah, it's like it's something he's someone we can all aspire to be, right? I know there's a saying, uh, what would Steve Rogers do, right? It's sort of a play on what would Jesus do, you know? But you know, there's something to that, right? Because he's such a good person. If you're looking to do the right thing, you might ask yourself, what would Steve Rogers do? So there you have it.
Hey, yeah, well said. Do you have anything to add to that, Porfirio?
I mean, yeah, Steve Rogers is a good guy. He's definitely like what Henry said, the Boy Scout person who follows all the rules and stuff. That's why the majority of folks like him. Um, he's also got America's ass, so that's a big plus. But you know, he's just a freaking awesome person. He's always just trying to do what he thinks is best, and uh, he has a pretty cool outfit, you know, the red, white, and blue striped America outfit, pretty dope.
Yeah. Like I guess full disclosure, this is very much not a character I grew up with. I think looking at him when I was a kid, it just didn't really click with me. I always thought he was like, ah, he's kind of lame. He's called Captain America. Ugh. Like, and he seemed like to me, he seemed like a worse version of Superman. I just really wrote him off as that growing up. And I mean, when I was also growing up, there wasn't like a really good Avengers show I could watch back in like the 90s outside of maybe like that one episode of Spider-Man the animated series.
hmm
And so he was a character I really wrote off, and the Avengers I just didn't really care about growing up. But it was really Chris Evans' portrayal and the Avengers movies that really got me interested in the character. It really showed me that this is a really great character, and I think the relatability is very key here. The fact that he is just a regular guy who's not the most powerful, but he's always the first guy to charge straight in. And there's just a lot of great scenes of him doing that in this movie and throughout the MCU. So, since this movie was one that really helped win me over to Cap, uh, how did you guys feel going into this movie? Let's going back to 2014, going in, talk about this being one of the most beloved MCU movies. So, what were do you guys have any expectations of this movie? Before I guess I finish it asking the question, I'm just gonna say this movie did come after the big hit that was the Avengers,
hmm
but of course Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World came right after, which were not looked upon as favorably. So,
hmm
how did you guys feel going into this movie?
I think like what you said earlier, Christian, I think like at this time, 10 years ago, 2014, I know like yeah, like Iron Man 3 and Thor 2 weren't probably like the hottest MCU movies at the time, but there were still movies that folks were talking about, like they were hot off the trail of Avengers 1, which was a big success. Iron Man 3, no matter how we feel about it, was a big success. I think when made over $1 billion. Thor 2, again, a movie not that many folks like, I think was still considered a success, not really a failure. So I think like with this movie, there was still like a kind of expectation that like you're gonna go to a Marvel film and you're gonna have a good time, like at least that was for me. And um, you know, like I said, I didn't really grow up with the Cap comics or was not that familiar with the Cap character besides what I saw on the movies, but like from what the trailer had shown and stuff, there was going to be a lot of great action scenes. There's going to be some mystery with this like mystery villain, the Winter Soldier, like who is that? And Black Widow was involved, and I think there's going to be like a cool like uh spy action movie that just felt different to like the MCU and very exciting.
Yeah, like, I I could definitely get down with that. It's hard to remember how I was personally feeling going into this, at the time because of those. But since you're the big Cap fan, Henry, how did you feel going into it?
I definitely was fully psyched to see this movie. Um, I did really love the first Captain America movie. Avengers was awesome, and yeah, I mean Captain America was my favorite Avenger, and this movie was a follow-up to the first Cap movie, which I loved, like I said. So I couldn't wait. Could not wait. That said, I mean, you guys brought up some good points. There was a bit of a lull after Avengers where Iron Man 3 and Thor 2 came out. And yeah, box office wise, they did fine. But I think with fans like us, we could see a little bit of a dip in quality. And I certainly was questioning things, right? I thought the first Avengers movie was like lightning in a bottle. It was a phenomenon, and maybe that was it. you know, like that was awesome. But then, like, yeah, Iron Man 3 and Thor 2 weren't so great. And I was thinking, oh, maybe the party's over. And there was some question marks with the Captain America sequel, right? Because the directors were the Russo brothers, who were unproven. They were more known for comedy TV. That really was like uh, made me wonder. I was like, who are these guys and why did they hire comedy TV directors for this one? And then also some of the casting. Um, I know the casting of GSP as Batroc made some headlines, and this guy's not an actor. Like he's like an MMA fighter, right? Um, so I was like, so is this movie kind of a joke? Like, what is this exactly, right? Um, so yeah, I just had a lot of question marks going in. It I again, I was super stoked to see it, but just quality wise, I did have some concerns about what it would turn out to be.
Hmm.
Dude, Loki Henry, totally forgot that the Russo brothers directed this movie.
I
Like,
mean, for all the stuff we're gonna talk about with this movie and its greatness, like this is the first movie in the MCU that the Russo brothers directed. This is where it
uh-huh.
all started, right? Yeah,
What
that's
their legacy started.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yep.
this will launch their career into high
Mhm.
gear.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, well, let's get into it. let's talk about what we liked about the movie. Um, I'd, s- I think a good place to start um, is that it is this really cool spy thriller. I think where the last movie, Cap One, was a World War II throwback, a little bit of a period piece. This one is very fresh, very new, very much about what the US government is doing in the information age, as opposed to the good guys and bad guys of the 1940s, Cap 1. And so because I think that was a really cool backdrop for the movie. I think that like is what makes it so cool. So how did you guys like? I guess how did you guys like the spy thriller aspect? How did you guys like that it was like kind of like a very new take on the MCU? And like did you guys like that it kind of connected also with say the Agents of Shield show?
I'll start off. So, uh, I feel like I have like three different answers to that.
Yeah,
Number
it's an
one,
open-ended question. So
number one, I did enjoy it. Just because there is a lot of action. I love a good action movie. And I've said this numerous times. A good movie is only as good as its villain. And Winter Soldier, like, I mean, is he considered the villain in this
I
movie?
would say so. Yeah.
It is a good question though.
Uh-huh.
It,
I'm
like
trying
that,
to,
yeah, go ahead, go
and
ahead.
I'm trying to think of that. Anyways, but I think like, because that connection between Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes, it's really cool. I mean, if you didn't know like that twist that like Winter Soldier's Bucky Barnes from the first Cap movie, that's cool that you didn't know that and you didn't have like, that it was able to throw you a curveball. And then like it like kind of yeah, definitely makes Cap like rethink like, oh, like do I want to hurt my friend? Like he's not himself, like do whatever. But other than that, like there is a lot of action, a lot of good action, and I love a good action movie that has a good storyline and a good villain. Check mark off that. Then two, um, after I've watched the movie, like probably months later, I was able to kind of like analyze how good of a movie it tackled political and government issues, which makes sense because it is like Henry said, a Cap America movie who is supposed to be this figure of good versus bad, moral values and all that kind of stuff. And so it fits within the um characteristics of Captain America, and it those themes that it tackled were really cool. And then three, I did fucking love that it was very parallel to Agents of Shield. I feel like that's nothing that's ever been seen before on media of like a movie storyline and a TV show kind of being concurrent with one another. Because like at the same time that this movie came out, again, Shield is overtaken, whatever. In the TV show, Shield is overtaken by Hydra because it's supposed to be very parallel to those same events. And so it was just kind of cool to be like, you have to watch one to understand the other or enjoy the larger um universe that's happening in real time with it those that release date. So I just thought that was really smart and cool.
Right
Yeah,
on.
the way it lined up was pretty cool. The way it seemed like the universe was pretty big.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and just go back to your original question, Christian, about like how did I feel about this movie being essentially a conspiracy thriller, whereas the first one was like a war adventure film, right? I thought that was super cool. Like the juxtaposition of a period war film versus this modern day conspiracy thriller story was awesome, you know? Like it was such a different setting and the tone was so different. You know, it's they're, you know, they're in the same film series, but tonally completely different. And I love that. I think the first Captain America movie is, you know, sometimes forgotten a bit and not as beloved as this one and a lot of other MCU movies, but I think it's a great movie, and I think it's super cool that these two uh, movies are so vastly different. And uh, the topic came up of is the Winter Soldier a villain in this movie, right? And I think pretty clearly he's a villain. He tries to kill Captain America. He tries to kill many people in this movie. Um, but he does have a redemptive moment at the end. And the ending of this movie, I mean, not to jump ahead too much, but the ending of this movie really parallels Return of the Jedi to me, right? Where Cap is like Luke Skywalker, Bucky is like Darth Vader, and Alexander Pierce is like the Emperor, right? Where um, you know, Darth Vader is a villain, and he definitely is a villain of the original Star Wars trilogy. But at the very end, he has that like redemptive moment, right? So that's kind of like Bucky, where Bucky is he's an assassin, he's a murderer, right? Um, but Steve is finally able to make him remember, right, who he is. And then he does save Steve Rogers' life at the very end of the movie. Yeah. So I mean, to me, the main villain of the movie is Alexander Pierce, and Bucky is one of several other villains. I think that's my take. An anti-villain or anti-hero, I guess you could say.
Mhm. Yeah, he's the one for the big fight at the end, but you really do feel bad for him.
Yeah.
Like, I think the scene where, he talks about how he knew like, "Oh, I knew him. I
Yeah.
knew Steve after they fight," and, Steve calls him Bucky, you know? You
Yeah.
start to see this humanity kinda peek through, and
Right.
he's starting to kinda question things, but they have to reset him.
Yeah, they're just like, shut up, we're gonna wipe your brain.
Yeah, and they wipe his brain, and it looks really painful how
Yeah.
they shock him, and they put this, like, apparatus on him, and so, like, you really feel bad for him, but you're like, "Man, I really hope Cap, like, gets through to him in the end."
Mhm.
And
Real
s
qu Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, go for it. Yeah.
No, I guess, like, I really wanna impose this question then really fast to both of you guys, like, would you, identify Bucky more as, again, the villain, an anti-hero, or a victim?
Ooh, hmm. I would say, I would say he's, like, the villain, he's the one fighting Cap. He's the one kind of that was trying to kill Nick Fury. He's not the only villain, of course, and he's more of a pawn of Alexander Pierce. But he's like both a villain and a victim in a
Yeah.
way. He's a villain in the fact that he's the antagonist of the movie,
Mhm,
but it's not really of his own will,
mhm,
and that's why he's a victim. And so in a way, it's the Winter Soldier's kind of the marriage of both of those in this movie.
mhm.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a victim who is forced to become a villain. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's why he's so compelling. That's why he
Yeah.
is like one of like you said, the movie's only as good as his villain,
Yeah.
and we have such a great villain right here because he
Yeah.
brings up a lot of conflicting emotions.
he's a very, yeah, complex character, you know? Like, again, like, he's not a brand new character, he doesn't have, like, a motive of, like, "I wanna take over the world," or anything, you know? Like, he has, like, for real, like, no real motive, and he's a character who was beloved in the first, Cap movie, and so I think, yeah, like, his, Winter Soldier's origin story has very complex, um, like, a story, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, since we've been talking a lot about the Winter Soldier, I guess keeping on the theme of characters, are there any other like characters you want to shout out? Any other characters in the movie you thought were really cool or had like a really good moment you want to shout out?
So many great characters in this movie. Oh man, it's almost like too many to mention. But I guess since we're kind of on the theme of villains, maybe I'll shout out a couple other villains. Um, so as I mentioned, Alexander Pierce is the primary villain, played magnificently by Robert Redford, and the Winter Soldier, played by Sebastian Stan, is great. Um, but even like the sub villains are great in this movie. You know, like Brock Rumlow, aka Crossbones, played by Frank
Mm,
Grillo.
mhm.
So great, like such a small role, but he just kills it, man. He is so menacing
He's
and
badass.
oh, so badass. Like I keep that. Yeah, you mentioned moments. Like there's that moment at the end when Captain America gives the great speech, right? He's like, the price of freedom is high, but it's a price I'm willing to pay, you know? And Shield is like completely confused, right? Like the agents don't know who is with Hydra, who isn't, and there's all this confusion. And that's when Rumlow comes out and he like has one of the Shield agents um or he wants him to initiate Project Insight. Yeah, and you can just feel the tension. And Grillo is just like super intense, and I just love him in this movie. He's really great, and like I said, not a lot of screen time, but his menace really shines through in this one. Oh, and real quick, Arnim Zola is awesome too. Arnim Zola was a sub-villain in the first Captain America movie and does even less in this one. But there's such a great scene that features Arnim Zola as essentially AI here,
Mhm,
right? So in the middle of the movie, there's a scene that's essentially like an exposition scene, right? It's explaining stuff. Natasha and Steve are looking for this data point, right? They end up at Cap's old training grounds and they discover Arnim Zola in AI form, right? And he explains to them what Project Insight is all about, what Hydra has been up to since World War II. And it's one of those scenes like in another movie where it might be time to go get your popcorn, right? They just kind of explain stuff, but it is so gripping. And Porfirio, you're kind of alluding to the fact that this movie deals with a lot of real life stuff, real life issues. And this scene really nails it. It really ties in with what's going on in the real world, the chaos of the real world, um, privacy issues, um, all kinds of like um, real world news items, right? And I love the fact that it is, you know, again, Toby Jones playing Arnim Zola, but in a completely different way.
mhm.
And and how again that the scene is it's one of those scenes that should be boring but isn't. And that's kind of a microcosm for the whole movie, right? Every scene in this movie kind of gets you some way. Um, like the action is great, and we'll have plenty to talk about there, I think. But even the non-action scenes are great too, and this scene is a great example of that.
Mhm.
hmm I want to give a quick shout out to this is the first time we see Sam Wilson, you
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
aka the Falcon,
Yep.
aka the later Captain America.
Yep.
But like yeah, like he's introduced very early on in the movie that Steve Rogers is always saying on your left,
Yep.
and very comedic, really cool and funny. And I don't think unless you know who Sam Wilson is from the comics, as a casual Marvel fan, you don't know like what kind of significance he's gonna play later on in the movie. And it's not till like he brings out his jetpack, and has those like Falcon um mechanic wings, it is totally badass and
Yeah.
cool and um like I just remember being like I want to see more of this dude and he is super cool. Um yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, great call outs. I got one quick one of my own, like someone that we've seen in several movies, but I thought he was peak here, and that's good old Nick Fury. I think this
Yeah.
is really the best Nick Fury we've seen. He gets his own action scene, which has the opening with of the Winter Soldier, which is really great. Where you get
Mhm.
to see him for the first time. That, like he dies and comes back in pure Nick Fury fashion, not telling everybody. Like he even has that like really great quote of what was it? Last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye. Something like that.
Yep.
But I really think this is peak Nick Fury here. Going back to this being, you know, a bit of tying a lot into Shield.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
You know,
So,
real quick,
oh yeah.
furthering on that, like I would argue every character in this movie who is in other movies, this is like peak them. This is like the
Mhm.
best we've
Yeah.
seen of them, right?
Black Widow,
Yeah,
you know.
I think we see the best Black Widow action of all the MCU here, including her own movie, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, it's just like peak everyone. I agree on Fury for sure, but it's like I would argue further that it's like peak everyone.
Yeah, I can get behind that. It is peak everyone. So, well, we've been talking about a lot. Let's just talk about our favorite action sequences. There's so many good ones in this movie. The action is so tightly choreographed and well made, and
Mhm.
each one is just a blast. So, do you guys have any good action scene shout outs?
I'm
When
super curious to hear from everyone because I hear a different answer from different people on this one. But Porfirio, you had something you were gonna say?
Yeah, like when before we started recording and we were talking about the action scenes. I think the first one that came to mind right away was the fist fight hand-to-hand combat scene between Steve Rogers and Bucky, you know, like that
Which one?
Ooh,
the knife one
the
in the
Oh,
highway
there you
beginning.
fight,
go. There
Yeah,
you
the
go.
where
highway one.
Yeah.
yeah,
Like
with where he flips the butterfly knife around.
yeah, like I saw the behind the scenes choreography behind that and it's just so fucking impressive. I mean like it's cool to see it like on the movie. It's definitely like badass, but to actually see it like behind the scenes like how many times they like practiced it and it was had to be like choreographed and perfect to the T. It just makes that scene I think feel so much more impressive and cool.
I
Mm,
love that too.
yeah.
Although I wonder if you would consider that its own scene because it's so almost like a fight within a grander scene, right? Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. Like, cause, like I said, that's the only thing that comes to mind. But like the whole like other highway scene, like I'm like I didn't think of that. I thought of the hand to hand
Ah, there you go.
knife fight, you know?
So this is what I've heard. Like what I've heard most commonly is um these scenes, right? There's the elevator battle. I
Mm,
think that's the one I hear the most, right? When Rogers is in the elevator surrounded by um Rumlow's strike team. Yeah.
mhm,
And he
mhm,
goes, before we get started, does anyone want to get out? It's
mhm,
so great. A line that I still hear all the time. It's great, and I love like the close quarters fighting in that. There's the boat battle at the beginning on the Lemurian Star.
mm,
That's awesome. Um, there's the Nick Fury action scene that Christian was talking about. That is amazing. I hear that come up quite a bit also. And then of course, what you're talking about, Porfirio, I kind of lump it together as that whole scene. Like it's like what I call the urban warfare scene. So it starts out on the freeway, and it ends up like on the streets of Washington D.C. Right?
mhm,
Um, I think that's the best scene, the best action scene, the urban warfare scene, just because like it almost like one ups itself like it constantly one ups itself, right? It starts off on the freeway and there's like that awesome car chase, that the car chase, and like Bucky like rips the steering wheel like out of Sam Wilson's hand. He's like, what the fuck? Right? And they're like they tumble out of the car and then Bucky fires a grenade at he shoots a grenade launcher at Steve. He puts a shield up, and Cap goes like flying off the freeway. It's just like it's so awesome. And then like it gets better, right? But it's not until like even later on where you get that knife fight. Yeah, there's all kinds of awesome shit that happens. And it's one of
mhm,
those scenes that like it just builds up and builds up, and there's just like so much awesomeness that happens. I mean, I haven't even scratched the surface. There's like um, there are great Captain America moments. There are great Black Widow moments. There are great Winter Soldier moments. Sam Wilson without the wings has some cool moments in there too. Um, yeah, I don't want to rant too much, but there's this one part where Cap like loses his shield, right? Like I was saying, Bucky fires a grenade launcher. Cap goes flying off the freeway and he's without his shield for a while and he's like dazed. He's like inside a bus and he doesn't know where he is. But then when he gets the shield back, holy shit, like the strike guys, they go after him, right? And they're just like shooting everything at him. They're just like throwing everything they got at him. And he's using the shield, blocking the bullets, and then he does something that we haven't seen in the MCU before. I've seen it in the comics, but he deflects the bullets with his shield back at them, right? And it's so satisfying,
mhm,
so good. And then there you got Bucky versus Natasha. That's super cool. Like you got Natasha doing her thing with the deception. She used that little like playback where she fools Bucky into thinking she's on like one side of the road, but she's on actually on the other side. They go at it, and then Bucky kind of gets the upper hand, right? He actually shoots her, almost kills her until Cap saves the day, comes in, and then you have that amazing hand-to-hand scene, Steve versus Bucky, and it has like the knife action you were mentioning, Porfirio, and also the big reveal, right? You have the reveal of who the Winter Soldier is. It's actually Bucky Barnes. And just real quick, I know I'm ranting a bit, but the first time I saw this movie, when the mask came off, and the first time you see Sebastian Stan's face, and Steve Rogers says, Bucky? There was like a gasp in the audience. Like someone went, right? And I'm like, oh my God, you didn't know that the Winter Soldier is Bucky Barnes? And I kind of took that for granted, but it
yeah,
was like legitimately shocking for some folks. Yeah.
mhm.
But I can't say enough about that scene. That one is my favorite action scene.
Yeah, good call outs. Yeah, those scenes rule. It's hard to I guess for me, I think I do really love the elevator scene. I think just the way it just builds tension in very quiet ways but you
Mm-hmm.
kinda know that something's wrong because you're told, "Shield is compromised, trust no one," by Nick Fury.
Mm. Mhm.
And
Ooh,
then
yeah.
but no one really shows their hand during that scene where it feels like exposition, and Alexander Pierce is trying to get information out of Cap. You're not sure. You think, okay, this guy might be compromised, but you, the viewer, are not totally sure. You're not sure what to think at this point. Who
Mhm.
is, who isn't? They haven't revealed that Hydra has compromised, or Hydra's the one that has completely taken over Shield, and who's on whose side.
Mhm.
And you kind of see them working together a bit beforehand. So for them to all get in the elevator, and then you see like a quick shot of someone with their hand on their gun, like you kind of see the tension just very, very slowly build until he says that great line. And it's just so claustrophobic
Yeah.
that it just adds to this tension. You wonder, how is he going to get out? There's so many guys in there. How is he going to beat them all?
Mhm.
And then the tension just keeps ramping up even after he's actually defeated all the guys in the elevator. He opens the door and there's more guys coming,
Yep.
and he has to escape. So, like, yeah, scene's great. The boat scene is also pretty awesome as well.
Yeah.
I love that there's a little bit of a stealth twist to that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For me, another scene, I don't know if if you guys would consider it an action scene, but I really love that scene where I think it's Cap where he like goes on the mic and he says like, "Oh, Shield's been compromised. Like, Hydra has compromised Shield." And so like
Yeah.
everybody in the room looks at each other and it's like, "Oh, who do I trust?" or whatever. And then they
Yeah.
all like point at a gun at each other and like even as an audience member, you don't know like who is Shield and who's Hydra. And so there's just like, like distrust and like confusion and tension. Henry or Christian, you brought up that word tension, and that scene was a lot of tension. Like
Yeah.
Sharon Carter, she's in that scene, and she's just also like aiming at like whoever. 'Cause yeah, I think that's the scene where they're trying to launch the
Mm-hmm.
carrier,
Yeah.
and she has like her gun pointed at the guy who's trying to push the button. She's like, "Don't!" And
Yeah.
it was fucking awesome. That
Yeah.
tension in that scene was awesome.
Yes.
That is another great scene. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So many good ones to talk about.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh, it makes me think of something like a big positive of the film. Also, I think is a few comedic moments. Like overall, the movie is very intense, action heavy, a lot of thrills. Um, but I think there's like just enough comedy in there to lighten things up. We talked about Anthony Mackie in the Sam Wilson role. He's comedic, he's really funny, and it's like just enough to diffuse the intensity. Um, Scarlett Johansson is pretty funny in this movie as Black Widow. We've never seen her like this jokey before, right? She's very serious in the Avengers movie, very serious in the Iron Man 2 movie. But yeah, she's cracking jokes and stuff, and she kind of brings some comedy here too. And the
Mhm.
Russos, I think they brought their comedy chops to this movie too. You don't think of this movie as a comedy movie, but there's like some cool, subtle comedy in here. Like even in that intense elevator scene, something I really chuckled at watching this yesterday, just watch it yesterday, was like that tension building you mentioned, right, Christian? Like there's a guy who's kind of gripping his gun tight. Steve notices that. There's a guy who's got like a bead of sweat running down his head. Steve notices that. And then people are starting to like fill up the elevator, right? So first it's like Rumlow, and then a couple kind of big dudes come in, and like Steve is just getting more and more suspicious, right? And then finally, like the last time the door opens up, like these three really thuggy looking guys come in, and it's like super obvious that they're gonna fight. And like that third wave was like, okay, that was just fucking funny. Like it's so obvious. Like they wouldn't even try to hide the fact they want to like take him out. And that's like the subtle comedy I'm talking about. I really dug that.
Yeah, it's like just enough to like kind of lighten the mood a bit or release
Yeah.
some of the tension that just keeps building throughout this movie that we keep coming back to.
Yep.
Or having that and having Black Widow be a lot quippier than she usually is, I think does, like you mentioned, like does really help that.
Mhm.
So, well, you guys got anything else you guys want to shout out? Anything you really liked about this movie that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, only because we haven't mentioned Chris Evans, really. Chris Evans is really great in this movie. I think we've mentioned that speech he does a lot. The speech is great. Like when he fires up his fellow Shield people. Um, and yeah, it's one of many great Captain America speeches that Chris Evans does in the MCU. Like he has that great speech in Endgame, and it's just like that's Captain America, right? You know, like he's not a leader because he's like the smartest guy in the room. He's a leader because he's so inspirational, right? And yeah, that speech is so great. And kind of like what we were talking about, the comedy, like after Evans gives this great speech, Anthony Mackie chimes in and he's like, "Oh, did you just make that up or was it off the top of your head or did you write that down beforehand?" You know, and again, just a little bit of comedy help lighten the mood a bit. But yeah, definitely since we were given props to a lot of different actors and characters in this movie, you know, got to give it for Cap. Give it up for Cap also. Chris Evans is great.
Hmm. Yeah, he plays him so like earnestly, you know.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think the whole Man Out of Time works so well in this particular era of the United States because it's so different. Because he's so much a man out of his, he's so out of his element, and that's also kind of why we root for him. We kind of see he kind of props up this long forgotten ideal of the United States, or what feels like long and forgotten in this kind of information age where things feel a little bit more muddy, a little bit more convoluted, and the times have changed. And I think like he plays them so well, you know,
Mhm.
that it's really easy to relate to this character. So
amen.
good shout out with Chris Evans. Oh, you got any other things you really liked about this movie, Porfirio? Anything you?
Mm, it was the first movie to feature my favorite hero, Scarlet Witch, at the end.
Yeah.
Hey, there you go.
I just remember, oh my gosh, did I scream in that theater? Yeah, I remember at the very end, yeah, it shows like because like at this point, we know Marvel is known for their post-credit scenes, and I know this was like already phase two, but this was basically the start of the rest of the MCU, what we know the MCU how it looks like today. And yeah, it was the introduction of Scarlet Witch and her brother Quicksilver. And I just remember, yeah, screaming and being excited when I saw that character. And honestly, very surprised because, you know, those two are the sons or the children of Magneto. So technically, they're mutants, which are an X-Men franchise um
Right. Which
property,
Disney did not own at the time.
which Disney didn't own at the time. So I just remember being kind of confused but optimistic and just being like, okay, so they have like mutants here. Are we gonna see any more of them? Are we gonna see Magneto? You know?
Yeah.
Um, but so there were just a lot of questions that that post-credits scene raised. But at the end of the day, I was just excited to see Scarlet Witch on the big screen for the first time.
Yeah, good call out because it does kind of go back to I think what was going on at the time with Marvel and Fox and how they had to do a deal for these characters. I've
Mm-hmm.
heard the deal was because Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are, even though they're mutants and they're Magneto's kids, I heard they were technically Avengers characters
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh,
not
right.
X-Men characters. So it
Yeah.
was Fox who wanted to bring them over to their universe, the X-Men universe. Um,
Did but
well,
didn't
yeah,
didn't at the time, didn't Days of Future Past already bring over Quicksilver?
yeah, like, well, they did the deal. Like Fox could use Quicksilver
Uh-huh.
for um Days of Futures Past, and
Mm-hmm.
they actually kind of I think Scarlet Witch. They don't really say her name, but I want to say she's in the beginning of Apocalypse. Um, and I heard that Marvel, Disney Marvel, was able to use the scrolls because the scrolls are a Fantastic Four property,
Oh,
Mm.
which was
right.
owned by Fox. So
Mm-hmm.
I heard
Right.
that was the trade that they did:
Oh,
Quicksilver and
interesting.
Scarlet Witch
Mm-hmm.
for the scrolls
Mm-hmm.
to be
Interesting.
used in Captain Marvel a few years later.
Mm-hmm. I I remember also at that time, Marvel, they were being sneaky bitches and they changed the backstory to Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch in the comics so they weren't no longer Magneto's kids.
Of course.
And I
Yeah.
think I think they stuck by it since then. Um, but yeah, they were again like yeah, like they didn't own the properties to Fox, so they were just like, well, we're gonna change the backstory. So now they're no longer mutants, you know,
Hmm.
Retcon the hell out of that thing, huh?
right?
Hmm.
Hey,
Man,
as long as we're still on positives, there was one thing I definitely wanted to bring up. And you know how I mentioned how it was cool that even in an exposition scene that is typically pretty boring, it's pretty interesting because it dealt with AI and a lot of like real life issues.
Hmm.
Um, so that was cool. I think this movie does really well in scenes that are typically on the boring side and making it pretty interesting. Like the scene between Steve Rogers and Nick Fury talking about the helicarriers and Project Insight. That's really fascinating. Where Steve's like, "This is not freedom. This is fear." And
Hmm.
again, deals with a lot of cool real life stuff. And then the scenes between Cap and Alexander Pierce, and it's grounded, man. It feels real, and I love it. But what I was going to get to is the flip side. Like, so oftentimes with exposition scenes, it's a little bit boring. It's time to go get your popcorn or whatever. On the flip side, with action scenes, like that's the big payoff, right? That's the reason we go to see these movies, and this movie has some of the greatest action scenes we've ever seen. But I would add also that with action scenes, often the case is sort of the opposite, where you get action, but it comes at the expense of character development, right? We see this a lot where, oh, that the movie was great, but like I don't know, I didn't really care. I mean, the action is great, but I didn't really care about the characters so much because I didn't get to know them, right? It's just action for the sake of action. I don't know these characters that well, and it's usually a balance, right? You gotta have some story, you gotta have some character development, then you gotta have the action, and then you get paid off because you know the characters and there's some stakes there. But with this movie, it does something really cool and I think kind of groundbreaking where the action there is character development happening in the action, right? So like the Nick Fury scene is a good example of this, where Nick Fury is great. Samuel L. Jackson is great as Nick Fury in this movie, but he's not in the movie a lot. And really, it's just this one action scene he's in. But even the action scene, you kind of really get to know Nick Fury and what he's all about. Like he is so resourceful in this scene, right? Like most others would be killed by Hydra in its case, but you see like why Nick Fury is like the world's greatest super spy, right? He is able to get out of that situation, which is like seemed completely impossible, right? And he just shows, it's almost like he shows you what Nick Fury is all about in that one action scene more than like all the dialogue scenes he's had throughout the years, right? It's so cool. Similarly, we get to see this with Cap, like the battle on the boat, the Lemurian Star battle scene. So he fights Batroc, right? Pretty cool fight scene. There's a cool moment in it though that I wanted to call out where Batroc's like, I thought you were more than the shield,
Mm.
right? And it's kind of a ploy for Cap to put his shield away, right? Which he does. He puts his shield away, which is like the stupidest thing you could do, right? You're taking away your only weapon. But at the same time, it is like pure Captain America, right? It's like he fights fair. That's Cap. He's the good guy. He's the Boy Scout, right? So it's a dumb move, but it's a totally Captain American move, right? He puts his shield away and like, what are you doing, Cap? But of course he still defeats him. But it's a super cool character moment. Yeah, I love it so much. And just a little bit more like Black Widow has some stuff along these lines too, where um so kind of like Fury, where she doesn't have superpowers, but she gets by on her resourcefulness. Yeah. So like, oh yeah, I already kind of mentioned. I don't want to talk about it too much, but when she battles Bucky, she uses like the little recording of herself, and she's able to use like those wires to fling herself off the freeway, and she kind of tricks Bucky into think she's like running one direction, but she's actually not, and then she almost takes out Bucky from down below because she tricks him, right? So again, like character moments, you're getting to know these characters through action, and typically that's not the case. And when I saw that, it's like it was mind blowing. I didn't understand it, but I think it sort of heralded like a new era of action filmmaking where you don't have to sacrifice character development in your action scenes because you see it right here. This is a great example. So, yet another reason why the action scenes are so awesome in this movie.
Hmm. Yeah, well said. Yeah, you're right. And that's what makes them so riveting.
Yeah.
So, well, talked a lot about what we love about the movie. This is probably gonna be a much shorter section, but do you guys have any dislikes about this movie? Anything you guys didn't like while watching this movie?
I don't know if this is so much a dislike, uh, but I feel like this movie that there's a lot of stuff going on, good things, like good positive things, but like sometimes I forget that this is a Captain America movie. Like it wasn't even until like even in this conversation alone, it wasn't until like Henry brought up Captain America much later in the
Mm-hmm.
conversation when he was like, "We're throwing all this stuff that we like, da 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 da," but let's talk about Cap.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I mean. Like there's so much things going on that we might like, whether it's the action, how Bucky is portrayed, the character development, that sometimes like I feel like all that overshadows Cap Cap's role in this movie, and the fact that it is a Captain America movie. Um, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but I again, not to say that it's not a bad movie, but I'm just saying like sometimes I just forget that it is called Captain America, the Winter Soldier. I just say the Winter Soldier, or that's Captain America 2, whatever, Um, but yeah, that's that's my little rant,
Yeah, it's the Shield movie.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the
Yeah.
counter argument is if you don't think there's enough Captain America in this movie, wait till you see Civil War. That's like even less of a Captain America movie, right?
No, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's I'm just thinking like, is there only one Captain America movie? The first Avenger, Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's enough Captain America hero stuff in this movie to make this a Captain America movie. He's got the big speech. He really saves the day. Like, I mean, it is a team effort, but it's no mistake that Cap like disables two of the three helicarriers, right?
Hmm.
He's like the main dude. But I agree. Yeah, it's more of an ensemble.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I also agree. Like, if I just, you know, I cannot see like any other character being like the person to do what Cap represents in this movie. Like
Yeah.
if Tony Stark were the one to be like betrayed by Shield, um, I can't see him doing the same actions and steps that he would do against Shield, like what Cap did. Or even if it was like um Scott Lang or Mark Ruffalo or whatever, Hawkeye, I just don't
Hmm.
see them like this movie only works because it's a Captain America movie.
Yeah, that's true. Good point.
Mhm.
Well, I had to get like super duper nitpicky to find anything I had problems with. So I did have a couple call outs. One is just it's almost just a side note. It's really ridiculous, but it's kind of been in my brain for the last 10 years, so I just wanted to mention it. But okay, so in the first Captain America movie, Captain America the First Avenger, Cap wears this cool battle suit. Porfirio was talking about how cool the Cap suit is, and it's a very excellent like adaptation of the comics Cap because like early comics Cap had a kind of a silly looking suit, right? So really cool.
Very bright color.
Yeah, super bright, got the big bell bottom boots and all that.
Hmm.
And they did a cool like movie translation. And in that translation, there are two red stripes on his torso. For some reason, in this movie, Captain America the Winter Soldier, there are three red stripes on the torso. And I don't know why. And I've never determined why that is. So he steals his own suit from the Smithsonian, right? To go to battle at the end of the movie. So it should be the exact same suit he used in World War II, right? But for some reason, instead of two stripes, it has three stripes. So that's my super nitpicky complaint.
Okay, wait. I have to ask, Henry,
Yeah,
did you like notice that on your own, or did someone else point that to you? Because I
no,
would not know that unless someone pointed out to me.
yeah, no, I definitely noticed that on my own. I definitely did. And but keep in mind, I did cosplay in that first Avenger costume. So maybe that's why I saw it. But I think
Mm,
actually when I first saw the movie, I noticed it.
mm,
Um, yeah, and I mean it can be easily explained. Like maybe he didn't have one battle suit in World War II. Maybe some had two stripes and some had three. Um, Another reason maybe was to sell toys, like we've heard about Marvel Studios wanting to be toyetic, right?
mm,
Um, why have people be satisfied with Cap 1 action figures when you can sell them like Cap 2 action figures, like, oh wait, this one has 3 stripes. You didn't get the latest one yet, kind of thing. Maybe that was behind it. I don't know, but it's just kind of one of those things that like kind of bug me. So 10 years later, it still bothers me. So
Have
that's
you
my
ever
yeah, okay. What was that?
have you ever looked it up?
I did look it up, and there's no definitive thing. Like, there's no like statement by the Russo brothers on it. No one has officially said anything. It's just like some theories here and there along the lines of what I mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
So it'll forever be a mystery, I guess. um, okay, so that was super nitpicky. This one's a little less nitpicky, I think, and I think I have heard some complaints about this also. So we were talking about that great elevator battle scene and how it didn't end after he takes out his opponents, right? Because he opens the door and there's like a whole bunch of other Hydra agents looking to take him out, and
Mhm.
he's in trouble. What does he do? He jumps out the fucking elevator, right?
Mhm.
Which is like really exciting. But then what happens? So he just goes in a free fall. I mean, he falls with like, I don't know, 7 stories or something. And he lands like boom, like flat on the ground on
With
his
his shield.
shield,
Uh-huh.
but like straight to the ground. And he just gets up. Like it seems pretty silly that he didn't like break every bone in his body. You know what I
He's
mean?
Captain America.
He is Captain America. Um, but to this day, it does seem a bit far-fetched that he was able to walk away from that, was able to run away from that. Um, so and yes, Porfirio, he is Captain America, but let's go back to why I love the character. I love this movie. The Captain America character is relatable because he doesn't have these incredible powers. He's basically a normal person with enhanced abilities, right? Yes, he's strong, but he doesn't have super strength. He's like basically the strongest a human can be, but still human strength, right? And he can get hurt, right? And the movie is great in that it is grounded in reality. This is why we love it. He's not a super powered being who can survive that sort of thing. So when something like that happens, it just kind of bugs me, right? So my justification is so when he falls, there's like a glass ceiling that he hits and he breaks through that and then he hits the ground. So my thinking is that that first impact sort of broke his fall and it slowed him down a bit and then he fell more, but he didn't free fall like that full amount, right? Where he slowed down halfway and then he landed on his shield and his shield is legendary, right? So that, in theory, absorbed
Absorbed.
a lot of the impact, right?
Mhm.
So I guess that's my best explanation for it. It still kind of bugs me to this day. Like, here's what I would have liked to see. So I would have liked to see him do like a rollout. Like he does that a couple of times in the movie, I think, where from a great height he jumps and he kind of rolls. Like that's what you do if you're jumping like
Mhm.
from up high, in order to not hurt yourself, you roll. You do like a shoulder roll.
Yeah.
I would have liked to see that here because it seems like if you didn't do something like that, you would definitely break some bones. So that's my gripe. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to find things you don't like about this
Yeah,
movie. It's
exactly.
because this movie's it's just so tight.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's like I don't even know if I could think of really much I disliked. I think one part I think if I go for anything, I wouldn't even call something a dislike, just the part I think I liked the least in the movie, like if the movie is, say just out of 10, this out of 10, I think like the movie's so the movie works because it's it feels so grounded.
Mhm.
And I will say like, if any part, and although they teased at the beginning of the movie, I do think I'd say if any part kind of dips a bit, it's probably the helicarriers at the end. That's always the part we seem to
Mhm.
say the least as far as well, we talked about our favorite action sequences.
Mhm.
The big helicarrier climax battle is far and away the biggest, but no one ever we didn't really, I think, bring that up outside of
Yeah.
the big speech, and I think the one-on-one at the end between, um,
Bucky and
Cap
Cap.
and Bucky, and that part's great. Like, that part's great. Like, I'm not even saying this is, like, a bad scene or anything,
Mhm.
but I think it's the part that feels like, it's like, "Oh, this is a bit too much. This doesn't feel like the grounded, like, close quarters action that I
Mm,
really
Yeah.
loved
mhm.
from the beginning." This is the part that feels like, it gets a bit too superhero-y in a
Like
way.
very like a little comic book.
Yeah, but I
Uh-huh.
don't mean, of course, I don't, I don't mean that in a good way, but I'm not gonna say it's a bad scene or something that I wholly disliked.
Mhm.
And it also, I guess the good part is also like, it gives Falcon some air, you know?
Yeah.
Falcon
Mhm.
is a character that needs to fly around, and this is the scene where he really, literally spreads his wings.
Yep.
So there's still like things I did like about this scene, even though I'd say it's probably a bit that feels a bit too much. But that's about it. That's not even a big dislike from me.
Mhm. I mean, like that scene also like I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not gonna like argue against you because I do see where your points. But you know, I don't know how long term the Russo brothers or Kevin Feige were thinking, but it also low key, does set up for Civil War, like as one of those, as being one of those like messy scenes that like why the Avengers need to be monitored,
Mhm.
because of this like
Hmm.
total destruction and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as well as further Cap's belief that maybe the government can't be trusted.
Right.
Maybe the
Freedom over
powers.
security.
Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But I agree, like, um, the earlier action scenes are so good that that final action scene is a little bit of a letdown. Yeah, it's kinda, um, hard to believe because it is pretty exciting, but yeah, it's just because earlier the action was so amazing, right? It's a little bit of a letdown. It does have to be said. Yeah, I do agree there. Um, but not only do you get like some cool Falcon action, and yep, the famous Cap speech is really part of that scene also. I would add also, if it weren't for that scene, you really wouldn't get the real payoff, and that's the realization that Bucky has, right? When he finally remembers, yeah? So, yes, it is like kind of a standard Marvel things are falling from the sky, epic ending that we've seen like way too much of, to be honest. But it's a great backdrop for this like really special Steve and Bucky moment, right? So Bucky is just like pounding the shit out of C. Rogers, right? And he's still brainwashed. And Cap is like not fighting back. He's like, he will die
Hmm.
before he'll fight back. He's like, if this is how I'm gonna go, like I'm just because I believe in my friend, sort of thing, right? And like the helicarrier is just like falling apart behind them, and Bucky's pulling back, and like one more blow, and like Cap is done, right? But he says, "I'm with you till the end of the line," right? And then Bucky realized what is going on. And man, when that happened, the first time I saw this movie, I almost cried like uncontrollably. Like I held it together, but I definitely welled up, and like the emotions were just like there, man. And it was a great moment. It was legitimately awesome moment. And yeah, any problems you might have with that ending, like, I look to that moment as being the counter to that because the ending was sort of like it set that up, and you to set up that moment and for it to have that impact, it was kinda, like, all worth it, right? So, shout out to that amazing moment.
Mhm.
Yeah, like, even parts that are like, "Yeah, not so," like, that's how hard it is to find stuff we didn't really like in this.
Yeah.
So, I think with that, why don't we get to our ratings? I guess I've got, unless you guys got anything else you wanna quickly shout out before.
I wanna ask a question. So, again, we're doing a 10-year anniversary reflection on Winter Soldier, you know? Yeah, this goes for either of you, whoever wants to answer, but is is the issues that are talked about in that movie still relevant today? And two, um, like, I guess, yeah, very similar. Like, is it still a good movie 10 years later?
I guess I'll start. I think what the movie probably was really talking about at the time was the Patriot Act. It's about the US government just spying on people in order
Mhm,
to look for threats, look for terrorists, and that's kind of what they were getting at with Project Insight and the helicarriers, just the idea of using information as control. I think that's what I see as like kind of the core, and I think
mhm,
in a way we've gotten probably farther into that. I think with there's kind of many things that we see like information espionage are like very important, and wars ch- wars really changed from World War II,
mhm.
and so especially in the internet era, in a way, it's like yeah, I still think there's a lot that feels relevant today, and that maybe. And so, what was the second part of your question? Is this movie still as good as
Yeah.
good now as it is today? I think
Mhm,
so. I think some of the action, I think in a there's action that does look better nowadays, but um, I think in terms of choreography, like John Wick, with just we've gone away from shaky cam. It's hard to really
mhm,
put that against the movie, but the movie still does use some shaky cam, which I'm not as big of a fan of in my action movies anymore.
mm, mhm,
But I think it's so well choreographed and the story is very tight. And like you were talking about, Henry, with the action scenes really playing a role in character development, that like they're still great. I think this movie still very much holds up today.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely love this movie as much now as I've ever loved it. Um, but yeah, it's relevant as well. It's still relevant, you know? Everything you mentioned, Christian, I agree. But looking at some of the core stuff in this movie about like using our data against us. I mean, that is as big a thing now as it's ever been, right? Like user data and privacy, huge issue right now, you know, with the internet and everything. Like it's a legit concern. And like, you know, at the time you mentioned the Patriot Act, at the time the movie was kind of playing with those concerns a bit. But yeah, still completely relevant. Like the fact that Hydra uses our information to target us. Like that's some scary shit right there, right? Because that is something that can happen and is happening right now, right? So definitely relevant still. AI came up. AI is a big thing right now. AI is almost a side note. It's really just like Arnim Zola, right? Um, but still, still a relevant thing. You know, the fact that we could still like live on in a way, right? Arnim Zola physically died, but he lived on in artificial intelligence form,
Mhm.
and he's a big problem. He's a menace, right? That still is relevant today, right? AI is a huge concern, and yeah, I think when it comes down to it, the question really is: has this movie become dated in any way? And I don't think so, really. Like, I was kind of searching for that when I watched this yesterday, and like the only thing I came up with was this one thing where Natasha um unveils like all of Hydra's plans and like releases it to the internet. She like posts it on Twitter or something.
Mm.
And she's like, "Oh, look, we're trending." Right? And that was definitely a term of that time. Like, we don't really use that term so much. Like nowadays it might be it's going viral or something like that, right? Um, I remember the term trending was very popular at the time. So that's like the only thing I can think of this movie being a little dated. There might be a few other references. I think when Jasper Sitwell is trying to track down Cap, he mentioned something about PDAs, something like that. Like, but I mean, other than that, like, yeah, the movie doesn't feel dated. It's still great. Um, and as long as we're just kind of freeform discussing stuff before our ratings, um, I did have just a couple things I wanted to bring up. One's kind of funny, little trivia thing here. We mentioned like small comedic moments. It's pretty funny when Steve Rogers reveals his list. He writes down things he's got to watch or read or listen to. Sam Wilson gives him a cool music pick, so he writes it down, and you see his little list, right? And it's pretty funny. It says like Star Trek and the moon landing, stuff like that, right? But did you know that there is a different list for different regions throughout the world? So when this movie released, the UK had a different list than we did, and we had a different list than France, and there's a whole bunch of different lists out there. Um, and it's kind of a unique thing for a Hollywood movie, but yeah, there's like a whole bunch of different versions of that list. If you have a chance, look them up on the internet. They're pretty amusing because they're kind of specific for each region, right? My favorite was the one for France. Daft Punk is listed for France. I was like, fuck yeah, let's go. But yeah, each region has like a little bit of that region's like specialty. So just like a fun little nugget there. I dig that. Again, it's like it's that like subtle comedic touch that goes such a long way for this movie, and a lot of great moments in the movie. And I don't want to get into this too much, but tonight just so happens to be like the final night of the 2024 Democratic National Convention. And Kamala Harris did a speech tonight, which was really great and echoed a lot of the themes from this movie, interestingly enough. I mean, maybe it's just because I just watched this movie last night and I saw her speech tonight, but she likened the Trump administration in 2016 to 2020 as being very chaotic, a time of chaos. And it really reminded me of this movie where Arnim Zola described Hydra's plan post World War II as being intentionally chaotic. They intentionally wanted to create a chaotic world so the people of America would favor security over freedom, right? So that was interesting. The use of the word chaos and those themes. And Harris also mentioned Trump's plan, Project 2025, which eerily sounds like Project Insight. And she mentioned how part of Project 2025 is to silence journalists and other enemies of of the MAGA movement, right? Sounds very similar to Project Insight. Project Insight is eliminating enemies of Hydra, literally murdering them, and Project 2025 isn't quite that, but it's
I
the
mean, might
same.
as well be.
It might as well be, yeah, exactly, and it's the same sentiment. So not to get too political, but you talk about relevance. I mean, the movie taps into stuff that is literally happening this very moment, right? So yeah, I can't say enough about the relevance of this movie. Still relevant, still great for sure.
Yeah, in a way, it's almost more relevant now than it was then.
In a way,
In a
yep.
way, but all right. Well, I'd say let's get on to our ratings. I guess this is gonna be. Actually got two parts to this, but first we'll start with our usual out of five ratings. So, scored a 1 to 5. How would you rate Captain America: The Winter Soldier? Um, why don't you start, Porfirio? How do you feel?
This one, yeah, 5 out of 5. I mean, there's not much to dislike with it. Good action, good characters, um, great themes that are still relevant as today as it was when it first came out. Um, Great entertainment. It fit the MCU um timeline perfectly. Um, Set up Civil War and Age of Ultron. So there's not much to dislike, but a lot to like about it. So 5 out of 5.
High praise. Praise. What about you, Henry? How do you feel about this movie?
How do I feel? So I think I've pretty much said everything I've wanted to say here. I still love this movie. I, you know, can watch this at any time, like I never get sick of it. So that says a lot. I've seen it many, many times. Still not sick of it. Gets better each time, really. Um, so definitely a 5 out of 5. That goes without saying. And I would go further for sure. This movie, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, is the greatest live action superhero movie of all time. That is my opinion. Um, and yeah, for all the reasons I've mentioned, just a few other things that I didn't quite get to. Um, yeah, I liked how you framed the MCU timeline with this earlier, Christian. How there was a bit of a lull in 2013, right? There was some question about, oh, did the MCU hit its peak? Is it all downhill from here? Like, there's some questionable choices being made here. Who are the Russo brothers? You know, and yeah, I do look back on the first time I saw this movie and some of the moments, the Bucky reveal, the gasp in the audience, and just the thrill of watching some of these action scenes. Oh my god. But another moment for me really was the very beginning where I did have a lot of these sort of questions about what is this movie going to be like? And I think I got my answer really early on the boat, right? So Cap is on the boat and he just starts taking out these pirates, yeah? And there's a moment where he just kicks this dude and the guy just goes flying off the boat, yeah? And I'm like, holy shit, this is like the next level. This is Captain America like we haven't seen him before. He's upped his game. And Marvel has upped its game. And the movie goes on and it's this total thrill ride. And like it's like this kickoff point. Like I think we were alluding to it earlier, but like this movie through Endgame, it's almost like uh undefeated, right? All wins. And yeah, I think of this movie as the start of greatness, really, yeah. Um, and yeah, like you're saying, the Russos started with this movie, their first Marvel film, and yeah, like they brought something really cool here. Like everything we mentioned, don't have to go back, but also like this cool pop culture sensibility too, yeah. So that's a big part of their other Marvel movies, right? Having these cool little pop culture mentions. Like they mention all like the time machine movies and Endgame, right? So here you could see like the pop culture influences, yeah. So just to name a few, there are influences from the movie Heat, the Al Pacino, Robert De Niro film. Um, the Indonesian action movie, The Raid, that was a big influence on this movie. There are some nods to war games, the 80s Matthew Broderick movie. There's a nod to Pulp Fiction at the end, which is really cool, where we see the fake Nick Fury tombstone. So on top of everything awesome, the Russos brought like some cool, fun pop culture moments as well. So I really can't say enough. And um, yeah, we talked a bit on our Scott Pilgrim podcast episode about, is Scott Pilgrim your favorite movie of all time? And on that episode, I had to admit that there was a time where it was number one, undisputed. Um, but at the moment, it was like a shared spot, right? So what I mentioned then, I think, is still the case for me, where uh, my favorite movie of all time is a shared spot. But this is on that list, right? It's Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That's my like three-way tie for first. So that's why I said greatest live action superhero movie of all time. Spider-Verse is an animated film, and Scott Pilgrim isn't really a superhero movie, right? It's a comic book adaptation, but I wouldn't exactly call it a superhero movie. So again, the greatest live action superhero movie of all time, 5 out of 5. And one last thing, maybe after you give your rating, Christian, but maybe just a brief discussion of, is this a superhero movie? Because it doesn't have a lot of superhero stuff in it. It doesn't have cosmic powers or magic, that sort of thing. So something to think about. Um, is this a superhero movie? Think about that as you give your rating, Christian. Go ahead.
Ooh. Okay. All right. So I think as far as just rating goes, 5 out of 5. I think I'm in agreement with both of you guys.
Yay.
Um, that's very, very high praise as the best live action superhero movie of all time. But I've heard it being brought up a lot as people's favorites as far as superhero movies, MCU movies. It definitely keeps getting high praise to 10 years later with everything that's come out since, especially the way we've seen the MCU develop since. I think this movie is still very highly favored. So, and it still holds up. So 5 out of 5 for me. As far as your question, is this a superhero movie? I definitely think it is. I think that I guess one is that it does have superpowers. It does, Captain America does have the super soldier serum, and Bucky, of course, has the metal arm, e- which, it's super strength in a different way. And so I'd call it a superhero movie. I can see what you're getting at and how it kind of taps into a lot of different themes and how it feels almost like more of a spy thriller. And But and also the fact that you don't have a lot of you have there's not a whole lot of costumes in the movie. You have Cap's costume, of course, but that's largely about Black Widow just has like a sneaking suit for most of the movie. Cap's actually in he does an entire action scene where he's just in a jacket and a shirt. Couple action scenes really where he's out of the suit. Um but my personal favorite superhero movies, The Dark Knight. I'm a big Batman fan and that's got zero superpowers. Um and I'd still call that a superhero movie. So I think both count.
I would agree for the reasons you just gave.
Mhm. Yeah, it fits the mold, but the best superhero movies almost you kind of question if they are superhero
Mhm.
movies or if
Yeah.
they just fit into their own genre because they're so well made. It feels like you're just watching its own thing rather than watching a quote unquote superhero movie. I think I've heard that for Logan as well.
Mm.
Also generally considered one of the best superhero movies ever made. But yeah, good question. So that was actually gonna be that's actually what I was gonna get into with my part two of where do you guys kind of feel this sits for you personally since it's one of the most beloved movies. Um, you mentioned it's your personal favorite movie. That's really what I wanted to hear. How it's your personal favorite movie and how you feel it's the best superhero movie. Um, I think for me personally, the MCU, I just love the bigger team up movies. I love my Infinity War. But yeah, do you have anything to add, Porfirio? Do you think this is a superhero movie? And where does it sit for you in your MCU ranking?
In my MCU rankings.
Yeah, so both those questions.
I
I
mean, I do, I guess, think of it as a superhero movie. I think like, um, what a superhero is. It's supposed to be like a moral compass of like right versus wrong. It may not be like the villain may not be like wanting to take over the world or whatever, but Cap is the embodiment of what a superhero is. This larger than human average, larger than life hero who is morally trying to do good. Um, and he's trying to fight, you know, I don't know if Bucky's the villain, but definitely wants to fight like this like other issue of like security versus freedom, so I think that's a superhero, you know, in its own way. Um, where it fits in my MCU. Um, so are we only talking MCU movies or also like TV shows?
just wherever. You don't have to give an exact number, but
I mean, it's definitely up there. I will say maybe like top, I don't know if I can say top five, but definitely top 10. It's definitely up there. And how many MCU projects there is, I think top 10 is pretty up like in the top percentage tile.
Yeah. There is definitely a lot now. It's a
Yeah.
long list.
Exactly.
over 30 movies. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, like Henry, I could rewatch this movie over and over and probably just enjoy it just as much as the previous time, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I think the reason I asked that question is you probably don't think of this as a superhero movie as much as you would think of Avengers Endgame as a superhero movie, right? A lot of colorful characters with bright costumes, you know. It's not that kind of movie. And it's almost like I think of this movie as just a great movie, period, more than I think of it as a great superhero movie, right? Um, like when you mention a superhero movie, it's almost like you're recommending something that has more of a certain aesthetic to it, you know, like Someone asks if someone were to ask me like, can you recommend a great superhero movie? Like, I would of course recommend this movie, but the implication in that question is like, okay, you probably want to see someone wearing tights, right? Like Spider-Man No Way Home. You'll love that movie. There's a bunch of dudes in tights in that movie, right? Or Avengers Endgame, where you see a whole bunch of superheroes with all kinds of superpowers, right? Um, so that's why I brought it up. It's just not the first thing you think of when you think of this movie, right? You don't think of superpowers so much. But I like what you said, Christian, that oftentimes the greatest superhero movies are movies that aren't really superhero movies at all, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I do want to echo, I think also Porfirio brought a really good point about how there's like a moral compass to this movie. And in a
Yeah.
way that also feels more superhero than a lot of others.
That's true.
Because
That's true.
uh, well, very high praise. So that's probably a really good spot to end it.
Yeah.
But I think we have a
But
really good comic pick.
dun dun
Bef-
dun.
So yeah, why don't you go over what we recommended?
Yes. So, did you know that Captain America the Winter Soldier, the movie, is based on an actual comic book series? Shocking but
Gasp!
true.
I did not know that. Tell me more, Henry.
There is a series of comics called Captain America Winter Soldier. Not called Captain America the Winter Soldier. Maybe that's one of many differences. But anyway, the Captain America Winter Soldier collection from 2005, essentially collecting issues number 1 through 14 of that run, written by Ed Brubaker, illustrated by Steve Epting, and it's great. It's a great read. I guess the disclaimer, though, is it is vastly different from the movie. Yeah. It's a completely different story. Many of the characters are different. Black Widow is not in it at all, for example. Um, Agent Carter, Sharon Carter, Agent 13, not Peggy Carter, Sharon Carter, Agent 13, plays heavily in it. She basically kind of uh, does the Black Widow stuff, the equivalent of the Black Widow stuff in the series. But I shouldn't even really compare it on that level because it is so, so different. The Red Skull is featured. Crossbones is in it quite a bit, like Crossbones, and not Brock Rumlow, the Shield agent. He's not a Shield agent in the comics. Just kind of different in every way. But the movie does shout out a lot of stuff from the comic series, like the moment when the Winter Soldier punches Cap's shield in the movie. That is like straight out of the comics. There's a panel of that, really cool panel in the comics. The moment when Bucky is revealed in the movie, Steve says, Bucky? And Bucky says, who the hell is Bucky? That is also straight from the comic series. And yeah, a number of shout outs. Like Falcon is in the comic series a bit, very little though, not as much as the movie. Iron Man is in it a bit. So very different, very different. The story is completely different. It does have the spy thriller espionage stuff, but maybe not so much the conspiracy stuff. And yeah, the story is vastly different. The villain in the movie, Alexander Pierce, is not in the comics, but there is a General Lucan who is like the equivalent of that character. He's like he controls the Winter Soldier in the comics. And then there's the Winter Soldier himself. So there are some differences there. This is kind of worth mentioning, I think. The Winter Soldier in the comics does have that same origin, right? Where he's thought to be killed in action in World War II, but come to find out that he's still alive. He's been alive all this time. He lost his arm, so he was given a metal arm, and he is highly skilled. But the big difference is in the movies, like Steve Rogers, he's given a serum. He's not given the super soldier serum that Rogers took, but like the Hydra equivalent of it, right? Arnim Zola gives him some sort of serum to give him super powers. Um, in the comics, he doesn't have that. He's just a highly trained assassin with a metal arm. So a little bit different. It makes for a slightly different dynamic in the comic because there is a showdown between Bucky and Steve at the end of the run, but instead of this like toe to toe, like blow for blow matchup, um, Captain America is clearly the superior opponent here, and it's more so getting Bucky to remember who he was more than like who's gonna win the fight because like I said, Winter Soldier doesn't have superpowers, so he's kind of outmatched here. So a slightly different dynamic there, and obviously a pretty big difference, uh, comics compared to movie. One last call out with the comic series. Um, Ed Brubaker did something really cool with this comic series, and that's retconning the entire legacy of Captain America in the comics, really. So there was there's this kind of disconnect, right? Where in the comics, Steve Rogers was found in ice in the modern world, and he's the man at a time, right? We've seen that in the movies. That did happen in the comics. Um, but the thinking was that he went under in World War II, was frozen in ice for decades, only to be found later. But the disconnect was there were Captain America comics post World War II. In fact, there was a run of Captain America in the 50s where he fights communists instead of fascists, right? So for a long time, that was just kind of like, I don't know, ignored. But Brubaker did this really cool thing where he explained the entire history of Captain America. How could Captain America exist in the 50s and fight communists if he was frozen in ice all that time, right? Well, he explained that there were multiple Captain Americas and multiple Buckies, right? So the Captain America in the 50s who fought communists was not Steve Rogers, it was a different Cap. So there's this whole intricate thing in the comics where everything was explained. You know, Bucky Barnes is still alive. There's an explanation for that. Multiple Buckys, multiple Caps throughout the years, and that's fascinating. That's like some like hardcore Marvel Comics history. So yes, the series is great for what it is, and like if you love the movie, I would recommend checking out the comics also. But that's like a huge appeal of the comics, I think, is really sort of pulling the curtain back on decades of Captain America history. So check out this series for sure. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I also very much recommend it. For, I forgot about that bit about the history, but yeah, that really does, I think, really make the comic and really make it stand on its own.
Right on. Yeah, and just one last little nugget there. Um, Pretty cool that um, again, for the longest time, the prevailing theory was Captain America and Bucky Barnes sacrificed themselves to save people during World War II. There was like an airplane with a bomb on it, and they were able to prevent the bomb from killing anyone else. But Bucky was killed, and Steve Rogers was sent into the water and frozen in ice for decades. So that was kind of the prevailing theory, right? But yeah, Brubaker did a bold thing where he said, "Wait a minute, guess what? Bucky survived also," and he had this like amazing uh, dark history behind him, right? And they came to face off uh, decades later. So um, a cool um storyline where like former best friends have to come to battle, and done beautifully, as we've talked about with this movie. But it did come from the comics, and that's where it all started. So uh, props and respect where respect is due.
Mhm.
Yeah. And with that, we can wrap up the episode. This is farewell from Henry, Christian, and Porfirio.